Title: Gregor Mendel, the Forgotten Genius Who Gave Birth to Genetics. Part 1. A Humble Beginning, 1822, 1843. Born in the shadows of simplicity. In a modest village named Heinzendorf, nestled in the Austrian Empire, present-day Czech Republic, a child was born on the 20th of July, 1822. His name was Johann Mendel. The son of simple peasant farmers, Johann's life began with the scent of soil and the rhythm of rural toil. The Mendel family lived humbly. Johann's father, Anton Mendel, was a farmer who believed in hard work and the land. His mother, Rosine, came from a family of skilled gardeners. Johann inherited a love for nature and a quiet observation of the worlden early spark in a mind destined for far greater things than anyone around him could imagine. The first seeds of curiosity. As a boy, Johann was unusually thoughtful and observant. He spent hours in the garden, fascinated by the way plants grew, how they differed in height, color, or yield. When others saw routine, he saw patterned curiosities worth questioning. He helped his father graft trees and cultivate vegetables, unknowingly sharpening the observational skills that would define his later scientific work. At school, Johann excelled. His teachers noticed his brilliance in mathematics, physics, and natural sciences. He was particularly drawn to the logic of numbers and the harmony of the natural world. Yet the Mendels were not wealthy, and sending a son to higher education was no easy decision. A vocation at the crossroads. In 1840, at the age of 18, Johann enrolled in the Philosophical Institute in Olomouc, where he studied physics and philosophy. He battled poverty, often suffering from poor health and anxiety, pushing himself to excel academically. However, the strain of limited finances took its toll. He would later reflect that this period tested not just his body, but his spirit. In 1843, Johann made a life-altering decision. He joined the Augustinian monastery of St. Thomas in Brno. The monastery was not only a religious sanctuary, but a hub for intellectual life. Here, Johann took the name Gregor and found both peace and opportunity. It was the perfect setting for a mind like his, curious, disciplined, and deeply introspective. A scholar in robes. At the monastery, Mendel was surrounded by fellow scholars and a vast library. He was free to study science without the pressures of economic survival. His abbot, Cyril Knapp, encouraged scientific inquiry and supported Mendel's education. Recognizing Gregor's intellectual promise, the monastery sponsored him to study natural sciences at the University of Vienna from 1851 to 1853. At the university, Mendel was exposed to the latest theories in botany, physics, and mathematics. He studied under Christian Doppler, known for the Doppler effect, and Franz Unger, a botanist who believed in the evolutionary origin of plant species. The intersection of math and biology ignited something within Mendel. He began to form a radical idea. What if inheritance followed rules, just like physics? A humbling failure. In 1850, Mendel attempted to become a certified secondary school teacher, a respectable career that would provide financial and social security. Despite his brilliance, he failed the exam, particularly in natural history, which included questions about anatomy he had never studied. It was a crushing blow. He tried again in 1856 and failed once more. The defeats were humiliating, particularly for a man who was clearly intelligent, but failure did not define Mendel. Instead, it pushed him toward a quieter path, one where he could explore the questions that fascinated him most. Rather than teaching students in classrooms, Mendel turned to teaching the world through nature, and the green, modest plants in the monastery garden became his new pupils. The garden laboratory. By 1856, Mendel had begun the experiments that would one day change science forever, but no one knew it then. In a section of the monastery's garden, Mendel cultivated tens of thousands of pea plants. He carefully selected plants with different trait sheet, color, shape, and crossbred them in methodical patterns. He kept meticulous records. He asked simple but profound questions. Why are some traits passed on and others not? Do parents blend their traits in their children? Or is there something hidden, invisible code that determines inheritance? Year after year, Mendel watched, counted, compared, and calculated. In an age of guesswork and vague theories about blending inheritance, Mendel approached biology with the precision of mathematics. What he found would shake the scientific world eventually, but not yet. Part 2. The Laws of Inheritance and the Silence of the World, 1850, 1866. The birth of the scientific method in a monastery garden. By the late 1850s, the monastery garden at St. Thomas had become a living laboratory. Surrounded by stone walls, shaded by trees, and cloaked in the silence of monastic life, Mendel's garden was where one of the most important scientific revolutions quietly took root. With a monk's patience and a mathematician's precision, Mendel designed his experiments like clockwork. He chose Pisum sativum, common garden pea for its distinct and easily identifiable traits. There were 7 traits in total, each with 2 clearly contrasting forms. Flower color, purple or white. Seed shape, round or wrinkled. Seed color, yellow or green. Pod shape, inflated or constricted. Pod color, green or yellow. Flower position, axial or terminal. Plant height, tall or dwarf. He pollinated plants manually, one trait at a time, making thousands of crossbreeds. For each generation, he carefully recorded how many offspring inherited specific characteristics. A discovery hidden in ratios. Patterns began to emerge. When Mendel crossed a plant with round seeds with one that had wrinkled seeds, the first generation, F1, all had round seeds. But in the second generation, F2, the wrinkled seeds returned in a ratio of approximately 3-1. Mendel was astonished. Traits weren't blending as the scientific community believed they were passed on as distinct units. From his meticulous data, Mendel formulated what we now call the 3 laws of inheritance. 1. Law of segregation. Each organism carries 2 factors, now known as alleles, for each trait, and these segregate during the formation of gametes. Each parent passes on 1 factor. 2. Law of independent assortment. Traits are inherited independently of one another. Just because a plant is tall doesn't mean it will also have yellow seeds. 3. Law of dominance. 1 factor, allele, can mask the expression of another. The dominant trait appears in the first generation, while the recessive one reappears in the second. A presentation to a world not listening. In 1865, Mendel finally felt ready to share his findings with the world. He presented his work, titled Experiments on Plant Hybridization, at 2 meetings of the Natural History Society of Brno. The lectures were well-structured, filled with data tables, mathematical reasoning, and new terminology like dominant and recessive. In 1866, he published his full paper in the Society's journal. Mendel thought he had uncovered universal laws of heredity. He sent copies to several of the most prominent scientists of the time, including Carl Nageli, a Swiss botanist. But the response was disheartening. His work was ignored, misunderstood, or dismissed. The scientific world simply wasn't ready for it. The painful silence. Why was Mendel ignored? There were several reasons. His paper was dense and mathematical, unfamiliar territory for most botanists. The importance of factors, what we now call genes, wasn't understood without the later discovery of chromosomes and DNA. Prominent scientists like Nageli failed to grasp the generality of Mendel's results. Mendel never published again on the topic. He continued some smaller experiments, even tried working with hawkweed, a plant that reproduces differently, and confounded his theories. Encouraged by Nageli to pursue it, the hawkweed studies only deepened Mendel's frou. By the 1870s, he had become abbot of the monastery, a role that consumed his time with administrative duties and led him away from scientific research. The silence grew. No one cited his work. The laws he discovered faded into obscurity. The final years. Mendel's final years were marked by duty, not discovery. As abbot, he fought against the Austro-Hungarian government's new taxation on religious institutions. He refused to comply and found himself in administrative battles rather than scientific debate. His health declined. He continued caring for his beehives and garden, but the brilliance of his mind found little outlet. He died on the 6th of January, 1884, at age 61, completely unknown in the scientific world. His tombstone carried a simple epitaph: no mention of the revolutionary work that had silently laid the foundation for one of the most important sciences of the modern age. A flicker in the dark. Mendel was gone. His paper sat in dusty archives. The world moved on, but the seeds he planted were alive, waiting to be rediscovered. It would take nearly 35 years for Mendel's laws to rise again, for his genius to be recognized, and for the term gene to enter the vocabulary of science. Part 3. The Rediscovery and the Rise of Genetics, 1930. The turn of the century, a scientific awakening. It was the year 1900, and the world stood on the edge of a scientific revolution. Electricity illuminated cities, the telephone had shrunk distances, and in the laboratories of Europe, botanists and biologists were experimenting with heredity. 3 men, Hugo de Vries, Netherlands, Karl Correns, Germany, and Erich von Tschermak, Austria, were conducting independent experiments on plant hybridization. As they analyzed the inheritance of traits, all 3 noticed strange patterns that mirrored the mathematical ratios discovered by an obscure Austrian monk decades earlier. The rediscovery of Mendel. Almost simultaneously, the 3 scientists stumbled upon Mendel's 1866 paper. De Vries was the first to reference it publicly in April 1900, followed closely by Correns and Tschermak. Correns in particular was outraged. He wrote that De Vries was trying to take full credit, despite the fact that Mendel was the true founder of the laws of heredity. The scientific world had just realized it had overlooked a genius. Mendel's laws were not only accurate, they were essential. They explained how traits were inherited from one generation to the next and laid the framework for a new scientific discipline, genetics. From obscurity to immortality, suddenly Gregor Mendel's name echoed through the halls of scientific conferences, classrooms, and journals. In 1902, William Bateson, a British biologist, began advocating Mendel's theories in England. He even coined the term genetics in 1905 in Mendel's honor. Chromosomes were observed under microscopes, and scientists realized they behaved exactly as Mendel's factors had predicted. The term Mendelian inheritance entered textbooks, and Gregor Mendel, once a forgotten monk, was now heralded as the father of modern genetics. Institutions scrambled to recognize his work. The Brno monastery, where he had toiled in silence, was now visited by scientists from around the world. His pea garden became a site of scientific pilgrimage. A science takes root. Between 1900 and 1930, genetics grew from theory to accepted science. Research inspired by Mendel exploded. Chromosomes were confirmed as carriers of heredity. Thomas Hunt Morgan and his team at Columbia University used fruit flies to map genes to specific chromosomes. The concept of mutations, first explored by De Vries, was integrated into Mendelian theory. Mendel's early mathematical approach suddenly looked visionary. At a time when biology was largely descriptive, he had applied statistics and probability to living systems. This fusion of math and life science was decades ahead of its time, a legacy that grew like a tree. By the 1920s, Mendel's name stood alongside Darwin, Pasteur, and Newton. But unlike them, Mendel had never seen fame during his lifetime. His legacy lived on in every Punnett square drawn by schoolchildren, every gene therapy being developed in modern labs, every DNA test, crop engineering plan, or medical breakthrough. Mendel had not just discovered how traits pass from parent to child, he had unlocked the rules of life itself. The recognition Mendel never received. In 1932, a statue of Mendel was unveiled in Brno. Scientists from around the world gathered to pay homage. At the base of the statue was etched, "Founder of the Science of Heredity." In a symbolic act, the church and scientific community, two realms, often seen at odds, came together to honor a man who had lived in both worlds. Mendel was a monk, but also a scientist. He had shown that faith and reason need not be enemies. He had also shown that genius sometimes blooms in the most unexpected places, like a monastery garden. The world he shaped. By the early 20th century, genetics had found its place. Agricultural scientists used Mendelian breeding to create better crops and livestock. Medical researchers began to trace hereditary diseases through family trees. In the decades to come, discoveries like DNA's double helix would be impossible to interpret without Mendel's groundwork. The seed planted by Mendel had grown into an immense tree with branches spreading across every field of biology and medicine. Part 4. DNA, Modern Genetics, and Mendel's Immortal Influence, 1930, present day. The genetic code is unveiled. As the 20th century progressed, the foundations Mendel had laid were about to be built upon in ways he could never have imagined. In 1953, nearly 70 years after Mendel's death, James Watson and Francis Crick discovered the double helix structure of DNA. With the help of Rosalind Franklin's X-ray diffraction images, they revealed the molecule that carried the genetic information Mendel had described as factors. What Mendel had inferred through pea plants and mathematics was now visible on a molecular level. DNA became the missing link that connected Mendelian inheritance to the mechanics of life. The invisible factors Mendel spoke of had a name, a structure, and a function. Mendel wasn't just the father of classical genetics anymore. He became the godfather of molecular biology. Genes take the world stage. With DNA unlocked, science exploded with new possibilities. The 1960s and 70s saw the cracking of the genetic code. Scientists learned how DNA is translated into proteins, the identification of genes for inherited diseases, the creation of recombinant DNA technology where genes could be cut and inserted into organisms. Mendel's influence was everywhere. His principles were guiding gene mapping, biotechnology, and medical diagnostics. His original principles, once scrawled in a quiet monastery in Brno, now informed multi-billion-dollar industries and global health initiatives. The human genome and Mendel's spirit. In the late 20th century, an international project was launched that would have astonished Mendel. The Human Genome Project. Started in 1990 and completed in 2003, this massive scientific collaboration mapped all the genes in human DNA, more than 20,000 genes each, one a unit of heredity, each one behaving according to the principles Mendel laid out. Mendel's spirit hovered over every sequencing machine, every data chart, every chromosome image. His ratios, once calculated by hand in a monastery garden, had matured into digital blueprints of humanity itself. Genetics in every field. Today, genetics influences every area of life. Medicine, from cancer therapy to personalized drug plans based on genetic makeup. Agriculture, Genetically modified organisms, GMOs, improve crop yields and resist disease. Ancestry and evolution. DNA testing kits tell people where their ancestors lived echoes of Mendel's vision of inherited traits. Law enforcement. Forensic DNA analysis helps solve crimes and exonerate the innocent. Conservation. Endangered species are preserved through genetic diversity and planned breeding. Every one of these fields stands on the shoulders of one quiet monk with a notebook. Mendel's global recognition. By the 21st century, Mendel was celebrated worldwide. Schools taught Mendelian genetics as the foundation of biology. Universities named genetics departments, laboratories, and research centers after him. Statues of Mendel exist in cities like Brno, Vienna, and Washington, D.C. In 2015, UNESCO declared Mendel's manuscript a part of the Memory of the World Heritage, honoring its global scientific significance. His life is now taught not only as scientific history, but as a parable of perseverance of a man who failed exams but conquered nature's greatest mystery. Lessons from a forgotten genius. Mendel's story is not just about science. It's about faith, humility, and unshakable curiosity. His life teaches us genius does not always come with recognition. Science needs both observation and patience. Truth doesn't always shout, it often whispers. He never lived to see the world validate his work. He died with no accolades, no followers, no hint that he had changed the world. But the seeds he planted in his garden, in his notebooks, and in the universe of thought grew into the science of life itself. The final metaphor: peas, people, and potential. In the final reflection, we return to Mendel's pea plants. Each seed he planted was more than a botanical experiment. It was a symbol of potential. He believed that inside every tiny seed there was a Laua blueprint that governed the shape of generations. So too in every human life. Mendel's own story is one of invisible strength of traits that carried across time, unnoticed for a generation, but essential. His brilliance, like a recessive trait, lay hidden until the right moment revealed it. Part 5. Mendel's Cultural Legacy and the Moral Genome, Modern Reflections. Mendel in the Classroom. Today, Gregor Mendel's name is one of the first students encounter in any biology course. High school classrooms around the world introduced genetics through his experiments with pea plants. His diagrams round versus wrinkled seeds, yellow versus green podsair, as iconic in biology as Newton's apple in physics. Teachers describe Mendel not just as a monk, but as a model of scientific discipline and logic. His work exemplifies the importance of hypothesis and controlled variables, the use of statistical analysis in biology, the beauty of simplicity leading to truth. His failures-failing teaching certification, being ignored by his peers, also serve as lessons in perseverance. For many students, Mendel becomes their first scientific hero. The ethics of inheritance. As genetic technology evolved, Mendel's principles gave rise to difficult questions. If we understand heredity, can we manipulate it? Should we? In the 20th century, some misuse Mendel's legacy in horrifying ways. Eugenics movements in Europe and America distorted his ideas to justify racial purity laws and forced sterilizations. The Nazi regime twisted genetic language into tools of oppression. Yet Mendel himself, deeply religious and rooted in humility, never envisioned science as a weapon. His legacy reminds us that scientific knowledge must be guided by human ethics. Today, as we face gene-editing tools like CRISPR, Mendel's foundational principles raise new questions. Should we edit embryos to remove diseases? What defines normal or desirable genes? Where is the line between healing and enhancement? Mendel in popular culture. Though a humble figure, Mendel has entered popular imagination. He has been portrayed in novels, educational films, and documentaries as the quiet genius in a garden, scribbling on parchment. Fictional characters in sci-fi often mention Mendelian traits when discussing cloning or alien genetics. Artists and writers interpret him as a symbol of purity in pursuit, a man who followed truth for its own sake. He's not just a historical figure, he has become an archetype of scientific virtue. The garden as metaphor. Perhaps no image is more powerful in Mendel's story than the monastery garden. It was not a university lab. It wasn't equipped with machines or modern microscopes, and yet within those humble grounds, Mendel discovered the basic laws of life, conducted one of the most significant experiments in human history, changed the way we understand heredity, disease, agriculture, and even identity. The garden becomes a metaphor that great ideas don't require grandeur-only clarity, curiosity, and patience. Faith, science, and harmony. Unlike many scientists who struggled with faith, Mendel found harmony in both. He believed that science was a tool to understand God's creation. Observation was an act of reverence, and that truth would never contradict the divine. In today's often polarized debates between science and religion, Mendel remains a bridge figure. His legacy teaches that one can be a man of deep faith, a meticulous, rational scientist, a servant of truth wherever it leads, the soul of a scientist. Mendel was never rich. He never won awards. He never led an academic institution. He lived his life in a monastery, tending plants, solving problems, and seeking order in the natural world. Yet he changed human history. He is proof that the true measure of a scientist is not public fame, but the impact of their questions and the courage to follow the answer 7 if no one else is listening. A name etched into the code of life. Today, Mendel's name is engraved in the Human Genome Project databases, Nobel Prize Lecture, textbooks in every language, but more than that, it is etched into the very code of life in every gene mapped, in every DNA molecule replicated, in every medical advancement made possible by genetics. In a way, every newborn child carries not only the genes of their parents, but also the legacy of Mendel, who showed the world how those genes work. The final testament? In his final years, Mendel wrote, "My scientific studies have afforded me great gratification, and I am convinced that it will not be long before the whole world acknowledges the results of my work." He was right. Though recognition came after his death, it came fully, powerfully, and permanently. His story is now told in every corner of the world, not just as a lesson in science, but as a testament to belief in quiet truth. Part 6. The Future Mendel Helped Build. Genetics in the 21st Century and Beyond. Into the Genome. Genetics and Modern Medicine. As science charges into the 21st century, Mendel's laws remain at the foundation of every medical advancement rooted in DNA. Today, genetic testing can detect over 1,000 inherited disorders. Doctors use genomic data to diagnose rare diseases, predict cancer susceptibility, guide personalized treatment plans based on an individual's genetic makeup. This movement is known as precision medicine, and it's reshaping healthcare. What began as a study of pea plant traits is now guiding human lives and decisions from pre-birth screenings to end-of-life care. Genetic engineering and Mendel's moral shadow. With the advent of gene editing technologies like CRISPR-Cas9, scientists can now cut out defective genes, insert new, healthy genetic sequences, even design trait before birth. This brings science to the edge of ethical cliffs. Should we use gene editing for cosmetic reasons? Could designer babies lead to new forms of inequality? Who gets access to these technologies and who doesn't? Mendel never imagined such power, but his principles underpin it all. The scientific community often returns to his humble ethical framework. He asks questions not for profit, but for understanding. His approach, rigorous, methodical, and moral, remains a guiding light in this new era. Artificial intelligence and genetic big data. In the 2020s, researchers began merging artificial intelligence with genetics to predict the function of unknown genes, simulate inheritance patterns across entire populations, accelerate drug discovery by identifying how genes influence diseases. AI platforms like DeepMind's AlphaFold now predict protein structures from genetic data cracking problems in weeks that once took decades. And yet, at the heart of this revolution lies Mendel's logic. Traits are passed predictably. Inheritance follows rules. Data reveals patterns. His 19th century tables of pea-plant ratios look primitive next to today's gene sequencing pipelines, but their mathematical soul is identical: space, life, and genetics beyond Earth. As space exploration accelerates, genetic science follows. NASA and international space agencies now study how genes behave in microgravity, how radiation affects DNA, and how future astronauts might require genetic resistance to spaceborne diseases or bone loss. Mendel's work reaches beyond Earth, now literally traveling into space. Future Martian settlers may owe their survival to gene therapy or epigenetic modification concepts grounded in the inheritance rules first observed in a monastery garden: evolution, ancestry, and human identity. Consumer DNA tests like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA have sparked a global interest in genetic ancestry. Millions now trace their roots through their chromosomes, finding long-lost relatives, hidden ethnicities, genetic risk factors. These services rest entirely on Mendelian inheritance models. At the same time, genetic research has blurred the lines between race and genetics. Scientists now confirm what Mendel would have understood instinctively: the variation within any human group is greater than the variation between groups. Genetics unites us far more than it divides us. This knowledge, rooted in Mendel's principles, is reshaping conversations around identity, belonging, and common humanity. Genetic art, music, and creativity. Even artists now turn to DNA as muse. Musicians convert their genetic code into melodies. Visual artists create portraits using gene maps. Poets write about the Mendelian mirror within each person. Gregor Mendel, a quiet man among leaves and flower shawls, become a cultural icon, bridging art and science. His work reminds us that the code of life is not only data, it's also mystery, memory, and potential. Education in the age of genomics. In today's classrooms, students don't just learn about Mendel's peas. They simulate genetic experiments on laptops. They explore virtual 3D chromosomes. They use open-source platforms to model genotype probabilities, CRISPR edits, hereditary diseases, and yet the core lesson is still Mendel's. Be curious, observe carefully, let nature reveal her logic. His legacy is not a museum piece, it is a living, growing field of discovery, a letter to the future. Imagine Mendel in today's world, a scientist surrounded by sequencers, CRISPR tools, AI models, and genetic data from across the globe. Would he feel out of place? Perhaps, but perhaps not, because at the heart of it all, the questions remain the same. How are traits passed on? What makes us who we are? What is life at its core? Mendel's quiet mind would recognize these questions because he was the first to ask them in a language science could answer. His methods were simple, but his insight was profound. Part 7. The Man Behind the Monk. Mendel's Inner Life and Quiet Struggles. A Childhood in Silence and Simplicity. Gregor Mendel was born into a world of modest means and profound quiet. Heinzendorf was no bustling city. It was a village shaped by the rhythm of seasons and the simplicity of farming life. From a young age, Johann, his birth name, seemed different. He was not drawn to physical games or loud gatherings. He preferred solitude, thought, and the whisper of leaves in the wind. Books, gardens, and the natural world became his companions. Though his family was poor, they nurtured his mind. His father, despite being a farmer, supported Johann's education, selling the family's only ox so his son could continue his studies. Education under pressure. Mendel attended the gymnasium in Opava and later the University of Olomouc. There, he struggled with financial insecurity and anxiety, especially during examinations. He was known to be brilliant in the classroom, but crippled by exam stress. This emotional barrier would haunt him for years. In 1843, recognizing both his intellectual gifts and his emotional vulnerabilities, Mendel joined the Augustinian Abbey of St. Thomas in Brno, hoping the monastery would offer a stable life, time for study, a quiet refuge for his troubled nerves. He adopted the name Gregor and embraced the monastic life. Life in the monastery. Far from being cloistered in silence, the abbey was a center of learning and culture. The monks engaged in philosophy, music, science, and education. Gregor fit in well. He was assigned to teach at the local school and was recognized as a gifted instructor. He played the organ, he kept bees, he corresponded with scientists, and yet he remained deeply private. Even among the brothers, he was known as reserved but kind, someone who preferred tending his plants and writing in solitude. His garden became his sanctuary. It was a place where order reigned, where he could conduct experiments with clarity and control, unlike the chaotic unpredictability of his inner world. The teaching certificate, his most painful failure. Mendel's efforts to become a certified teacher marked a turning point in his life. Despite being knowledgeable and enthusiastic, he failed the teaching certification exam once in 1850 and again in 1856. The failure was devastating. Examiners noted that he lacked adequate understanding of animal anatomia, subject he had little access to. Worse, his exam anxiety overwhelmed him, clouding his ability to respond under pressure. This failure closed the door on a traditional academic career, but it also redirected Mendel towards something greater, scientific independence. He returned to Brno not with defeat, but with determination. His garden waited, and so did the laws of heredity, relationships, isolation, and hidden emotions. Though surrounded by monks, Mendel's life was emotionally solitary. There's no record of romantic relationships, no signs of deep companionship outside scholarly correspondence. Many biographers speculate that his intellect and introspection often isolated him not out of arrogance, but from a deep sense of disconnection, and yet he was not bitter. He mentored students, he cared for the abbey's beehives and pets, he donated to charity, he remained faithful in his religious duties. His joy seemed to come not from people, but from understanding, from pulling back the curtain on nature's inner workings. His letters express awe, not pride. The science of nature is boundless, and the more we learn, the more we discover how little we know. The burden of being abbot. In 1868, Mendel was elected abbot of the monastery, a prestigious title that brought administrative burdens. His days filled with managing church lands, negotiating with government officials, and supervising religious and civic duties. His scientific work came to a halt. He resisted government-imposed taxes on monastic property and fought for religious rights. These battles drained him and isolated him further from the growing scientific world outside. In his garden notebooks, the entries dwindled. The world had ignored his discoveries. Now his time to continue them had vanished too. The final years and quiet departure. In the early 1880s, Mendel's health began to fail. He suffered from chronic nephritis, a kidney condition that eventually claimed his life. He died on the 6th of January, 1884, at the age of 61. His funeral was attended by clergy, students, and townspeople who respected him, but the scientific world was still silent. There were no tributes, no honors, no recognition. His papers remained unread. His legacy lay buried waiting for the century to catch up with him, the human in the legend. We remember Gregor Mendel today as a giant of science, but he lived his life in shadows unseen, underappreciated, and often misunderstood. He was a brilliant observer, a sensitive soul, a man of humility and integrity. He did not seek fame. He did not profit from his discoveries. He lived and died believing that his work was worth even if no one else believed it yet. In that quiet certainty, he planted the most important seed of all, the faith that truth once discovered will one day be recognized. Part 8. Mendel's Fingerprint in Modern Science, From CRISPR to Cancer Research. The Revival of Mendel in Laboratories. More than a century after his death, Gregor Mendel's principles are more than historical, they're operational. Across the world, biologists, geneticists, and bioengineers use Mendelian principles every single day. His work has evolved from garden observations to precision technologies, and his spirit lives on in the labs of modern biology. But the tools have changed. Instead of crossing pea plants, scientists now engineer genes, map entire genomes, and manipulate the very machinery of life. And yet at the heart of it all lies a single concept Mendel proved. Traits are inherited by predictable rules. Cancer and the Mendelian blueprint. One of the most important frontiers of genetic science is oncology, the study and treatment of cancer. Cancer is, at its core, a genetic disease, a result of mutations in DNA that cause cells to grow uncontrollably. Modern cancer research relies heavily on Mendelian inheritance patterns to trace familial cancers like BRCA, one-half breast, and ovarian cancers, gene sequencing to identify oncogenes, and tumor suppressor genes. Precision therapies that target specific mutations unique to a patient's cancer. The war on cancer is deeply rooted in Mendel's thinking. Genes determine biological outcomes, and by understanding those genes, we can fight back. Gene therapy, healing with Mendel's logic. Gene therapy is no longer science fiction. Today, scientists can insert functional genes into cells to replace defective ones, silence harmful genes, use viral vectors to deliver therapeutic DNA. These therapies depend on Mendel's understanding of dominant and recessive traits. For example, sickle cell anemia, a recessive genetic disorder, can be corrected by inserting a healthy copy of the hemoglobin gene. Children born with severe combined immunodeficiency, SCID, have been cured with gene therapy. Every successful treatment is a modern echo of Mendel's P-Planson, the knowledge that traits can be rewritten. CRISPR, editing the book of life. Few technologies have shaken biology like CRISPR-Cas9, a gene editing tool that allows scientists to cut DNA at specific locations, remove, replace, or insert genes with precision, edit live embryos or adult cells. CRISPR is revolutionizing everything from agriculture to medicine, but it's built on a simple principle: genes control traits, and if we understand them, we can modify them. Mendel's framework of inheritance is now a framework of design. Yet this power also brings ethical tension, and scientists often look back at Mendel's humility for moral grounding. His work reminds us, knowledge should serve humanity, not dominate it. Agriculture, Mendel's legacy returns to the soil. Ironically, the field where Mendel's work began plant Bredingus still deeply tied to his methods. Modern agricultural scientists use Mendelian genetics to breed drought-resistant crops, apply genetic markers to predict yields, engineer plants with resistance to pests, heat, or disease. Genetically modified organisms, GMOs, are now a cornerstone of global food systems. These crops are bred not just for survival, but for nutrition, shelf life, and sustainability. Every kernel of corn, every soybean harvested, carries within it a whisper of Mendel's work, carefully selected trait, guided by a rule written in his garden long ago. Mendel in evolutionary biology. Though Darwin and Mendel were contemporaries, they never read each other's work. Darwin's theory of natural selection lacked a mechanism for how traits were inherited. Mendel's laws provided the missing piece. Today, evolutionary biology is a fusion of both. Genus mutate. Natural selection filters them. Mendelian rules guide their inheritance. This fusion is called the modern synthesis, and it unified Darwinian evolution, Mendelian genetics, and molecular biology. Mendel didn't just complement Darwin, completed him. Behavioral genetics. Do traits shape our minds? Scientists have long debated whether behaviors like intelligence, anxiety, or sociability are inherited. Thanks to twin studies, genome-wide association studies, GWAS, and other tools, we now know many personality traits have genetic components. Complex traits involve multiple genes, not just single Mendelian pairs. Environment interacts with genes to shape outcomes. Though these traits don't follow simple 3-to-1 ratios, the foundation of analysis remains Mendelian. Identify heritable units, map their transmission, predict their expression. Even our understanding of human behavior owes a debt to the monk in the monastery garden. Genetic privacy, identity, and law. The power to know our genes also opens new risks. Can employers discriminate based on genetic risk? Can insurance companies deny coverage based on DNA? Can governments or corporations misuse genetic databases? In many countries, laws like the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, GINA, protect genetic privacy. But the conversation continues. Who owns your DNA? Mendel didn't face such questions, but his discoveries created the conditions that birthed them. His legacy demands not only knowledge but wisdom, responsibility, and compassion. Beyond biology, Mendel's philosophy of science. Gregor Mendel left behind more than genetic law. She left a model for scientific thinking. Curiosity, ask bold questions. Method, test with rigor. Precision, count and calculate. Humility, trust the data, not assumptions. His work is a masterclass in what science should be not about glory, but about truth-seeking. Modern scientists continue to revere him, not just for his discoveries, but for how he discovered them through patience, persistence, and honesty. Immortal in every lab. Today, his name is immortal. Every time a student draws a Punnett square, every time a researcher runs a PCR, every time a gene is sequenced, a disease is traced, or a child's future is shaped by inherited DNA, Gregor Mendel is present. His fingerprints are on every microscope, every pipette, every genome. He is no longer the forgotten monk in a quiet garden. He is the foundation of the life sciences, the father of heredity, and the quiet architect of the genetic age. Part 9. Free Will, Destiny, and the Soul, the spiritual echoes of Mendel's work. The question beneath the science. Gregor Mendel was not just a scientist, was a man of faith, philosophy, and inner depth. As a friar, he believed that truth, whether found in Scripture or in nature, was sacred. His work raised questions that extend beyond the laboratory. Are we merely products of our genes? Is free will real if our traits are inherited? Can our soul transcend our biology? These questions still echo in debates today, and Mendel's legacy lies not just in the science of heredity, but in the human search for meaning behind it. Inheritance and individuality. Mendel's discoveries showed that we are not born as blank slates. We inherit physical, mental, and possibly even behavioral traits from our ancestors. This challenges romantic notions of the self-made individual, but it also reveals something beautiful. We are continuations of stories before us. Our very existence is shaped by people we've never met. And yet, no two people are identical, not even identical twins. Gene expression varies, and so does life experience. So while genes guide us, they do not define us absolutely. The tension between destiny and choice remains unresolved, and perhaps that's what makes us human. Predestination or possibility? Throughout history, many faiths and philosophies have debated predestination, the idea that our fate is fixed from the start. Mendel's work seems to support that idea. If traits follow fixed patterns, doesn't that mean we are trapped by biology? But modern genetics tells a more nuanced story. Epigenetics shows that environment can turn genes on or off. Lifestyle can affect how genetic traits are expressed. Even with the same genes, different people live vastly different lives. So the truth is more balanced. We are shaped, not doomed, by inheritance. Mendel's principles help us understand ourselves, but they don't take away our freedom. They give us tools to navigate the path, not chains that dictate it. The soul and the sequence. Where does the soul reside if we can map all of life to DNA? This question haunts many who work in genetics. If we reduce everything to biology, where is mystery, consciousness, or spirit? Mendel, as a monk, believed that science was a window to divine design, not a replacement for it. He did not claim to explain the soul only, the laws of how traits passed. For him, discovery was not destruction of belief, it was its enrichment. Modern thinkers continue this conversation. Can the soul exist alongside genes? Is the mind more than neurons? Do spiritual experiences transcend biology? Mendel invites us not to fear these questions, but to approach them with humility and curiosity. Ethics, morality, and the genetic future. With the rise of gene editing, embryo selection, and bioenhancement, we now confront ethical questions Mendel never imagined. Should we choose our children's traits? Can we program intelligence, looks, or abilities? Who decides what is better or normal? Here, Mendel's personal character becomes a guide. He worked not for power, but for understanding. He believed in observation over ambition, truth over fame, compassion over control. If Mendel were alive today, he might not argue against technology, but he would urge wisdom in its use. He would ask, is this good or simply possible? Inheritance of values. Ironically, what Mendel passed on to us may be more than scientific laws. He taught us to be patient in the face of rejection, to pursue knowledge quietly even without recognition, that a life spent serving truth is never wasted. His humility, precision, and faith are traits we can inherit not through genes, but through example and memory. He gave us more than knowledge. He gave us a model for how to live as seekers of truth. A prayer in the garden. Imagine Mendel alone in his monastery garden, notebook in hand. Each plant he touched, each blossom he cross-pollinated, was an act of devotion, a prayer, made not with words, but with action. He studied nature not to dominate it, but to understand it, not to profit, but to uncover its secrets with reverence. His science was faith in motion. That image of a monk bending over pea plants, counting seeds under a sunbeam, is not just a scene of discovery. It's a moment of spiritual beauty, the legacy of quiet genius. In an age of loud opinion and fast fame, Mendel's story is a reminder that truth is patient, that genius doesn't always shout, that those who change the world often do so quietly. He never sought immortality. And yet, in labs, libraries, classrooms, and hospitals around the world, his name endures. He has become a symbol not just of intellect, but of integrity, perseverance, and quiet brilliance. Part 10. Full Bloom, the legacy of a quiet revolutionary. The world catches up. It took decades for the world to notice Mendel, a man who had seen the code of life, written in flower colors and seed shapes, died in silence. But in time, the world caught up. His ratios became rules, his notebooks became textbooks, his questions became entire fields of science. He had been invisible in his own era, but he now towers over every branch of biology. From evolution to bioengineering, from medicine to agriculture, every modern scientist walks on a path he began paving in 1856, and he never saw it. His ideas, our future. Mendel's principles are not stuck in the past. They pulse through every gene-editing breakthrough. Inherited disease therapy, climate-resilient crop development, personalized cancer treatment. His ideas drive the future of humanity. And as science moves into space, explores AI-designed genomes, and constructs synthetic life, Mendel's ghost whispers a quiet reminder. Understand nature before you change it. He gave us the rules. It's up to us to use them with wisdom. The timeless questions. Mendel answered many scientific questions, but left us with larger ones. What does it mean to be human? How do we honor the knowledge we inherit? Can humility and greatness live in the same life? His legacy is not just in what he discovered, but in how he lived. Patient, meticulous, unbending in integrity, willing to fail in order to pursue truth. These are traits worth inheriting as much as any gene. Full circle, the story ends where it began, in a garden. Not with fanfare, not with monuments, but with one man kneeling in soil, planting seeds. He could not have known that those seeds would one day unravel the mystery of life, guide global agriculture, heal genetic disorders, rewrite evolution. He could not have known that his failed teaching career would turn into the birth of a science, but he believed in the search, and that belief changed the world. A quiet revolution. Gregor Mendel never led a protest. He didn't publish a manifesto. He wasn't a celebrity. But he was a revolutionary. His rebellion was against ignorance. His protest was against assumptions. His revolution was one of insight, conducted in silence and solitude. He didn't fight with swords or speeches. He used data, patterns, patience, P's, and in doing so, he rewrote the understanding of life itself. Final words. Let us remember Gregor Mendel not only as the father of genetics, but as a model of intellectual integrity, a man who followed truth even into obscurity, a scientist whose faith and reason coexisted without conflict. His garden was small, his world was quiet, but his vision was vast and eternal. In every cell, in every chromosome, in every living thing, there is Mendel, still teaching, still guiding, still growing,